So again, I'm in the blue bubbles. Did you try those Smirnoff screwdrivers? I stopped at the Hilly for one last night. I said, haha, how did you get my digits? Defendant responded, the Melissa and Lito show. I said, haha, I thought you creeped John's phone. I said, haha, again. Defendant responded, no way, I was the last person in Greater Canton who didn't have your number. I think even Kerry has it. I responded, what, with a bunch of question marks? I said, I just don't give my personal number out to anyone. How would Kerry have my number with a bunch of question mark? And the defendant responded, Melissa had it. So the defendant said, I'd prefer a weed whacker. I responded, that's the thing about nicknames. Defendant said, we were tossing around the idea of a short vacay with the current show, wanted to see if you were game. I responded, you don't have a say. And I believe I was referring to nicknames. And I said, vacation where? Defendant responded, I know. They need to happen organically. I'm the queen of nicknames. Was just going to rent a beach house in, I believe it was supposed to say Fort Lauderdale, it's abbreviated. Something quick and easy. I said, Defendant responded, I'm the queen of vacays too, always a good time. I responded, I'm going to Nashville next month, 19 to 21st, for a benefit. One of our guys got shot in the head. You guys should come. So there's a photograph of somebody with a weed whacker. The defendant said, no, you're not a creep. I said, nope. She said, you're kind of a loner, which I used to be. I responded, no, not really. I have a ton of buddies, but I only let a handful of friends in that I'm tight with. So you think you got me figured out? And then I typed circle of trust in quotes. Well, the defendant said, yeah, I said loner, not loser. I assume you know a lot of people, PPL, people abbreviated. You never really can figure anyone out completely. Your dad died when you were young, and I responded, he died in March of 2020. I'm so not a loser, you won't figure me out, LOL. Defendant responded, no one is a loser, I just didn't mean loner to imply friendless. I'm sorry that's recent. It wasn't COVID, was it? I responded, cancer. Defendant responded, I know you date girls who don't lock the house behind them, and you are private and observant. I'm sorry, what kind? I responded, long brain, kidney, and pelvis. How do you know all these things, LOL? I said, you're funny. Defendant responded, yikes, wow, that's rough, Jesus, I'm sorry. We chat a lot at the hillside. I responded, don't be sorry, life is hard sometimes. I always figure it out. Then I said, who chats, question mark. Defendant responded, life is hard, but losing people is the hardest, so I'm sorry, we chat. I responded, that's all you got, we chat? Sure, you're from Brockton, spit it out. Defendant responded, you and I chatted about the girl who kept forgetting to lock the door. I said, oh, she has been out of play like for 3 months now. And then I believe it starts to say out of rotation, question mark. I said, I just got a Saturday invite. The defendant said, did you say yes, question mark. I said, not yet, with a bunch of periods, but did respond. Defendant said, what did you say, Mr. Elusive? I responded, no, I just don't want to intrude on your couple's night. Haha, I'm shy. The defendant responded, we prefer to hang out with non-couples. Bob Gallery is probably coming too, solo. We'll probably do cards or something at some point. I'm inviting you. And I said, haha. The defendant said, John said Brian's being wishy-washy now, in quotes. I responded, haha, did you tell him you texted me? The defendant responded, no. And then I gave a thumbs up. Then I said, you cranky now, question mark. Defendant said, haha, no, just stop being so anti-couples. Most couples don't even like each other. I said, name a few. Defendant said, name a few? I don't know. All of them. Question mark. They all want to hang out with single people. And then I said, In blue is going to be myself again. Foul ball. Defendant responded, you stink. I said, you suck and you're double trouble. Defendant responded, you're hot. I responded, are you serious or messing with me? Defendant responded, no, I'm serious. I responded, failing is mutual. Is that bad? How long have you thought that? Defendant responded, are you okay driving? You don't want to stay here. I responded back, I'm fine. I have an office at the PD. You didn't answer the question. And then it starts to say, defendant said, rather you stay here. So as I was exiting the house, it was either through the breezeway or the garage. And as we were walking out, the defendant planted a kiss on me. I said, I wish. I think you're messing with me. The defendant said, why do you think that? I responded, because this is so out of left field. Where did these feelings come from? Defendant responded, I just think you're like me. I said, meaning? Question mark. Defendant said, do you have your own kids? I said, I have no kids. How am I like you? Question mark. Hello? And defendant responded, aren't we alike? I responded, I think so. So why did you get my number and reach out to me? And I think the defendant put a question mark on that bubble, I believe. Shoot straight with me. Defendant responded, I told you, I just think we're alike, right? Couple question marks. I responded, yes, agree. Now what? Defendant responded, I don't know. I said, shouldn't you know? Defendant responded, do you like me? I said, yes, from jump. Defendant said, when was jump? I said, first time I saw you. Defendant responded, when was that? I said, Hillside for your sure. So again, I'm in the blue bubbles. Hillside for sure. When were you interested? Defendant responded, I don't know, you're just my type. I responded, you think you can handle me? I thought you were happy, question mark. Defendant responded, how do you know if I'm happy? I said, I just assumed. Defendant responded, are you hard to handle? I may have put a question mark. Then I said, what do you like about me? Defendant responded, I just feel like you're from my neighborhood. I said, yes, yeah, ditto. Defendant responded, and I think you're hot. You really think that? I have always thought that about you. Defendant responded, what? I responded that you're hot, smart, witty, but I didn't think you were interested. Defendant responded, witty? I responded, yeah, meaning quick with a response. Tell me why you got my number and reached out to me. Defendant responded, just thought we were the same / from the same neighborhood. I responded, are you afraid to say what's on your mind? What's in your mind? And then I said, on. Defendant responded, no, didn't I? No, didn't I? Question mark. I'm glad I stopped by. I should have come earlier. Do you really live in Mansfield? Defendant responded, yeah, I was basically begging you. I responded, you don't have to beg me. I meant to say beg. Defendant responded, huh? I said, I will give you what you want. How are you texting right now? And I said, leaving me hanging. Defendant responded, no. I typed kids and then kinda. Defendant responded, how am I texting? And I began to say, is everyone asleep? So it starts off with the defendant saying, I just wide awake on my phone. Yes, they are. I said, I should have stayed LOL. So now what? Question mark. Defendant said, yes, you should have. I responded, that would have been distracting. So now what? So no, what? And then I said, now. Defendant said, now what? Question mark. I responded, balls in your court. Defendant said, what do you want? I responded, loaded question. What do you want? Question mark. Defendant responded, I asked you, exclamation point. I in turn said, nope, you initiated this. I said, spit it out, I'm in the blue bubbles. Defendant said, hey, we're single and we don't have kids. We can do whatever we want. I responded, don't you have a boyfriend? Question mark. Defendant responded, where are you? Question mark. I said, Canton. Defendant said, where? Question mark. I responded, my office is at the PD. Why? Are you going to Mansfield? Question mark. Defendant responded, where is that? I said, Canton PD. Defendant said, I have a house there from before I reconnected W. John. I responded, oh, I feel like you're not really saying what's on your mind. Defendant starts off and says, do you like me? Question mark. I responded, yes, clearly. Defendant said, come over my house. I responded, when? Question mark. Defendant said, when works for you? I said, whoever, and then whenever, when works for you? Question mark. The defendant said, I asked you first. I responded, I think you're messing with me. Defendant said, I'm glad you came over tonight, with some type of face. I responded, me too, balls in your court. What do you want, Karen? You looked great tonight. He said, are you glad you walked me out? Question mark. Defendant said, yes, with like semicolon and some type of a mark there. Are you? Question mark. And I said, DEF for definitely. I'm in the blue bubbles. It says yes. And then I said, are you going home tonight or tomorrow AM? Defendant texted, we kissed, comma, right? Question mark. So then I put a question mark on her question and said, is this a trick question? Defendant said, I don't know when I'm going home. I'm selling my house, with what I think is a smiley face. What a trick question, and a couple of question marks. I responded, are you moving to Canton? I'm following your lead with this. Defendant responded, I live here, but I have property in Enfield. I'm guessing it's Medfield. Defendant said, why my lead? I don't want any responsibility. I responded, you started this, right? Question mark. Why did you get my number? And it says each out to me. It meant to say reach out to me. I then said, still have not told me. Defendant said, sorry, should I not have? I responded, I'm fine with it. Just don't know why you can't answer. Defendant said, you're mad at me? I said, OMG, no, not at all. You're being silly. Defendant said, I told you, exclamation point. I just think you like me and I'm attracted to you. And then she said, a lot. I responded, feeling is mutual. I just never saw this coming. Defendant said, why? Question mark. I responded, because I just assumed you were happy with your situation. Defendant responded, I was, but things have deteriorated. I said, why? Question mark. How so? Question mark. What did Melissa say when you asked for my number? Question mark. Defendant responded, it is very, very complicated. He and I dated when we were kids, and then his sister died and everything got fucked up. I responded, he seems very into you. Defendant responded, I just told Melissa that I had your number but lost it. I said, that's cute. She wasn't suspicious? Question mark. Defendant responded, no, she's great. I responded, does she know you like me? Question mark. Defendant responded, she's a sweetie. We just agreed you are great, with another smiley type face. Defendant said, yeah, but where is that? I have had all my shit here for a couple years and my house has been vacant, but I'd like to get closer to the water. I responded, are you breaking up or staying together? Defendant responded, I don't know. He hooked up with another girl on vacation. I'm very close to his niece. It is a very fucked up situation. I responded, When was that, and how did you find out he hooked up? Question mark. I don't want to complicate your situation. Defendant responded, we went away for New Year's, the four of us. I put the kids to bed and found him in the lobby of our hotel all over one of our friends. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I responded, it does matter. And I said, did they bang? Question mark. The defendant responded, does that matter? Question mark. I said, sorry, I was just asking. I was just trying to figure shit out. Defendant responded, it doesn't really matter. I said, okay, I won't ask again. Defendant said, I don't care, with a smiley face. It doesn't matter. I responded back, okay, hear you loud and clear, Karen. Defendant responded, okay. I responded, why are you getting your thing all twisted up over simple questions? And then I typed thong. Defendant responded, I'm not. I am, question mark. I responded, you're kind of getting defensive. Defendant responded, not at all, with an exclamation point. Defendant is in gray. She said, we did kiss earlier, comma, no, with an exclamation point. I responded in blue bubble, I think you initiated that, no, question mark. Defendant said, yep. Do I owe you an apology, question mark. I said, OMG, no. Why are you being sensitive? Defendant responded, I'm not. I responded, kinda. There's a P and a FFT, never, responded by the defendant. What do you want from me, question mark. I responded, what's on the table, question mark. Defendant said, what do you want ideally, question mark. I responded, the real deal. Defendant responded, it doesn't exist. I said, I can go to any base, but usually Hanscom and Bedford are down to the Cape. Defendant responded, which base down the Cape? Which branch? I said, Army's Army. Defendant said, I'm not abnormally sensitive. I responded, Joint Base Cape Cod. I won't be so hard on you. Defendant responded, OMG, you're not. You called me trouble. That makes me sound bad. I responded, I was just playing with you. Defendant responded, you weren't, but that's okay. I responded, stop being sensitive, please. Defendant responded, I'm not. Defendant said, I don't know, question mark. It's in old colonial. It has a lot of bedrooms, with kind of an emoji. I responded, more than you clearly need. Are you moving to Canton, question mark. Defendant said, I know, seriously, some rooms I only go into dust, not anytime soon. I'm there most of the time, but sometimes it's a lot. I responded, a lot, why, question mark. Defendant responded, I then said, do you even know what you want, question mark, or who, question mark. Defendant responded, because I went from being solo to trying to give attention to kids who aren't mine, and I never wanted kids. I responded, I thought you were in this happy relationship. Defendant responded, everyone is happy at the hillside. So it starts off with the defendant. It said, everyone is happy at the hillside, exclamation point. I responded, oh God, you avoid things. Defendant responded, it's just very, very complicated dynamic with the four of us. He isn't cut out for what he's doing, and the kids present constant issues. I responded, I think he believes he is doing the right thing. Defendant responded, well, of course he is, but his heart isn't in it. It's only because he was very, very close to his sister. I responded back, I know how you feel, kinda. I was married, and when I met her, she had a 2.5-year-old. I went from being single to being a dad. It's hard. Then I said, I'm divorced since 2017 and have no kids. Defendant responded, I try very hard, but they are very spoiled, and they're not my family. My parents keep telling me I'd feel differently if they were mine or my own sisters. Then I told you he got drunk and sloppy on NYE while we were away, and that has really affected me. I responded, what did he exactly do, question mark. Defendant responded, I never got married, and now somehow I'm arguing someone about raising kids with an emoji. I responded, why don't you tell me, question mark. Defendant responded, he was a puddle all day and then disappeared. Then I found him all over our friend's sister in the lobby of our hotel, and she's gross, which I think may actually be worse, not sure. I responded, oh God, did they bang? Defendant said, so I was the kids celebrating New Year's, I think it's without him, which shouldn't be my role. No, I doubt it. He was a mess. I said, was it the first time with her, or do you think there were others? Defendant responded, I don't really think there were others. I'm with him all the time. He never seems to want to go anywhere without me, but honestly, the issues with the kids bother me more than him actually cheating. They are constant, and it feels like a lose-lose. I responded, you clearly have a lot of feelings swirling inside you. Defendant responded, yeah, it's very complicated. Sorry for the rant. I responded, or began to respond, you can vent, babe. Defendant said, basically, I just feel like I spread myself too thin, and sometimes it's thankless. I responded, Defendant responded, you probably felt that way too. I responded, I did at times. It was one, not two, thankfully. Defendant responded, want to grab a drink, question mark. I responded, if you gave me some notice, I could have. Defendant responded, you in capital letters said you were adaptable. I responded, I am, but I have my work truck with me and not my personal. Do you get angry when you don't get your way? Defendant responded, that sounds like an excuse. I rarely get my way. Defendant said, are you single, question mark. I responded, yes. Defendant said, I don't think it's out of left field. Wasn't I already begging you to come over last Saturday? Question mark, question mark. I responded, you getting my number from Melissa and reaching out to me, question mark. Defendant said, and on vacay and probably a few other occasions. I responded, it should say you didn't really beg. Defendant said, I asked at least twice. How do people usually reach out to each other, question mark, question mark. I responded, why would I have thought you had any interest in me, question mark. Usually do it when they do live with someone, and then I said, do not do it. Defendant responded, maybe, maybe not. I said, I could go on and on, but I do not want to pump, it should say, your shit up too much. Defendant responded, thanks for saying that, but low comps at the hillside. I responded, you know how to ruin something nice. I frequent other places. The defendant responded, John has showed me about 5 times the ring video of me walking you out on Saturday, and my voice and my accent are killing me softly, with an emoji of somebody throwing up. I responded, what? Defendant responded, yeah, he has cameras everywhere, you cops, with another emoji. I responded, Jesus. Defendant said, he's like Christ, are you guys hooking up, question mark, question mark. And I said, OMG, great. I responded, I don't need drama, dude. Defendant said, no, it's fine. I responded, seriously? Defendant said, I'm serious, with an exclamation point. I said, you legit planted one on me. Defendant responded, I know where the cameras are anyway, duh. And then it was OMG Bruins with an emoji after that. I responded, so your slick move isn't on there, with some question marks? Defendant responded, course not. I responded, oh my God, and then I said, I almost, an emoji with somebody throwing up. Defendant responded, it was a peck anyway. I kissed Kerry and gay Jeff too. I responded, yeah, weak. I agree. Defendant said, LOL, funny. I responded, so now he is jealous of me, question mark. Defendant said, no, with an exclamation. I told you, he likes you a lot. I said, which makes this worse, question mark. Defendant said, you said or did something at the bar last week, and he goes, I like Brian more and more. I responded, I think he's a good dude too. Defendant responded, yeah, he is. I responded, funny. What's your end game? What do you want from me? You will just confuse it should say the shit out of yourself because I'm a lot of fun. I said, it was fun. Defendant said, I've complimented you today too, with a couple of exclamation points and then some type of emoji. I said, and kicked my nuts in. Defendant said, OMG, how? I responded, if I had more notice, I would have grabbed a drink somewhere, so I'm all set with, and then I said, in quotations, that's fine, but I am not asking again. Defendant said, well, it was 7 p.m. and I'm super cool, so right now I'm asking again with some type of I think it's a smiley face. I responded, coming to your house would have been bad for the both of us. For starters, you wouldn't have wanted me to leave. The defendant responded, now equals not. That sounds good. I responded, that's trouble. Defendant said, why, question mark. The defendant said, no, I'm busting your chops, it's okay. I responded, no, you are sensitive, nice try. You don't think if I came over for a drink, we would have gotten carried away. Defendant said, you in capital letters said you were adaptable and tons of fun. I took that as an invite for an invite. And I responded, oh, okay. Defendant responded, I'm 42, I know what happens when you invite someone over for a drink. I responded, you're the master of avoidance, so you think I would just give it up. Defendant responded, I've been a lot in my life. I have a little bit of cop DM mindset, and then said, been through. Defendant said, what am I avoiding, question mark. I'm not afraid to be direct. I responded, some of my questions. Defendant responded, okay, which? Ask again. I said, nope, tricks are for kids. Defendant responded, I'm pretty sure we would have hooked up. I responded, okay. Defendant said, I can't say that, question mark. I said, of course you can. Defendant said, did I miss any other questions, sir, question mark. Probably, are you having a drink right now, question mark. Defendant said, yeah, on my second. I said, show me what you got. Defendant said, none of that is true, exclamation point. I'm not talking to other guys and I have issues with John and things are far from perfect. You just happen to know about him, BC, I guess, because we all hang out at the same bar. I'm sure you talk to other girls. That's what single people do. I'm not married, neither are you, neither is John. I responded, was that your attempt at a lecture or deductive reasoning, question mark? What do you want from me, question mark? Defendant said, that's just how I think / feel. You don't need to approve. I've already answered that last question a couple of times, I think. I responded, I'm not judging you, never have, never will. Defendant responded, you shouldn't. I don't know what your private life is about, nor is it my business. Defendant said, my only, I'm assuming, point is that there's a difference between being married to someone and dating them, and we have no intention of ever getting married. The point of dating is not to get tied down if you're not confident you should be, in my mind anyway. The first two, but I don't care too much about the other girl. I responded, okay, so he is cool with you dating other people, question mark. Defendant responded, and I'm not happy per se, just realistic that there's cracks and it's far from perfect. I doubt it. If he's seeing someone else, I wouldn't want to know either way. He probably feels the same way, and you probably feel that way about whoever you hook up with. I think that's normal. I responded, okay. Defendant said, you don't agree with me, question mark, question mark. Defendant said, at a bar, question mark. I responded, I wasn't suggesting anytime soon. I know you're with your friend. I meant my house. Probably after 8. Defendant said probably after 8. I responded, okay, if you don't want Juana, that's fine, no pressure. Defendant responded, I will a drink. It looks like I tabbed the bubble with a question mark. I then said, what do you drink? Question mark. Are you out now? Question mark. Defendant responded, sorry, I'll drink whiskey if that's what you're having. I responded, haha, send me a pic of you two. So Sunday, January 23rd at 9:40 p.m., defendant texted me, phone works, and then an emoji with arrows going like both ways. And I responded, thought you were all set, question mark. Defendant said, with talking, question mark? No. I said, are you sure? And she didn't respond, and I believe I said, that was it for that, the 23rd, I'm sorry.
And again, what does the text say there?
Well.
That's from you to her, is that correct?
Yes. And the defendant said, John died.